Hey, let's talk about this new Molnupiravir Merck drug for COVID. A pill is what we're going to talk about today. So I'm doing something different. I just recorded a piece for YouTube about this that's succinct. It's like 12 minutes. But I thought let's just really dive into the nitty gritty of this live because it's Sunday. I already had the jacket and the coat on because we're talking about pharma, son, which means you got to get dressed up. Otherwise, they will cut you. Hey, everyone, welcome. I see y'all coming in. All right, let's get into this. So look, for viruses, we don't have a lot of great treatments across the board. The exceptions are maybe HIV, where we turn something that was a death sentence into a chronic disease with therapeutics and prophylactic medication, right? So PrEP, but then also all the antivirals that over decades we've developed for HIV have really turned it into a manageable disease for many people if you can afford it, if you're in the first world, et cetera. First, second, third, I don't even know the distinction anymore. Developing world versus the messed up world, ours, where we have the first world problems. So HIV is one. Herpes. Oh, what? That's loud. Let me turn that off. Herpes is another one. So acyclovir, valacyclovir. Influenza, you think about Tamiflu. So we have some limited antivirals. And this is because viruses are hard. They're hard to manage with therapeutics just because of the nature of the science there. But it's not undoable, right? Now, during the COVID-2 pandemic, people have been talking about therapeutics for a long time. And in fact, we have one, remdesivir, made by Gilead. That's just garbage. Come on, guys. Let's just really be honest. Like, it may shorten the duration of illness a little bit. It's usually given, it has to be given IV, so it's often done in hospital only for people who have pretty bad disease. WHO is like, don't even bother unless you're a part of a trial. You know, America's like, give it, whatever. You know, it does something maybe a little bit, not much. Right? So these don't have these huge treatment effects. And then people talk about ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. Let's just shut up about that. So ivermectin, there's trials ongoing, randomized trials. I'm not holding my breath. It's very hard to show a strong treatment effect for an antiviral. Now we have vaccines, which are great, and you want to prevent something wherever you can. So that's a key thing. We already have these vaccines, but there's a bunch of people who won't take them. You can break through the vaccine, especially with like things like Delta variants that are a little more aggressive. So, but still, that's the answer, but we just don't want to actually do it. It seems like in America, we're very vaccine hesitant. I've done video after video on this. So having an antiviral agent would be very helpful. Well, then you would say, but Z-Dog, we have antiviral agents. They're called monoclonal antibodies. Trump got them, Regeneron. You give them IV. Okay, that's already a problem, right? They are expensive. They are difficult to administer for both patients and the healthcare system. So it creates a logistical impasse, but they're quite effective. So they'll reduce severe disease, hospitalization, et cetera, when given early on. But again, it's kind of a tough one, right? What if there were a pill that you could give that, let's say you fail the vaccine or you fail to use your brain and don't get the vaccine? Sorry, that was judgy. There are plenty of people who have made rational decisions not to get the vaccine because they've previously been infected. And I still think they should get at least one dose. But back to this. So you're sick anyways. You've gotten infected. You have a positive test. Wouldn't it be great to take a pill? And the goal of the pill, an ideal antiviral, let's just keep it simple, pill, would do a few things, maybe 4 things, okay? The first thing it would do is stop the progression of the disease. So if you're infected and you take the pill, it really ought to prevent you from getting sicker. So if you're starting to feel symptoms and all that, you go get tested, you're positive, and you're like, dang, I don't want to get sick. The pill ought to do that. So that would be one thing you want it to do, prevent progression of disease. Now, the second thing you want it to do is prevent complications of the disease, even if you don't get that sick. So in SARS-CoV-2, we're talking about long COVID. So symptoms 6 months out where you're still coughing, brain fog, headache, fatigue, all the stuff that we read about that we still don't understand, but it seems to be happening. So you'd want to probably prevent that. That would be an ideal therapeutic. The third thing that would be really nice is that if you give this to somebody, it makes them less contagious. So they're less likely to spread it throughout their family. So reducing viral load in the nose and the airways that prevent spread of the disease. That would be nice. And the fourth thing would be that you could actually prevent the disease from even happening clinically in someone who's exposed or at high risk for exposure, but doesn't yet test positive. That's called prophylaxis. So we actually do that with HIV. It's called PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis. So you give these antiviral drugs and it actually reduces the risk of getting infected in the first place and manifesting any clinical disease. So that's prophylaxis. So that's what an ideal pill for SARS-CoV-2 would do. So what is going on in this space? And we've talked about this. I mean, this is the holy grail, really, because if you have a combination of vaccines and therapeutics, you end the pandemic. And then we can stop reading these stories like out of Stanford, where apparently some guy did an ad hoc study where he found that Stanford students were more likely to wear a mask than they were to wear a helmet when they bike. Now, I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but that's just the stupidest effing crap I've ever heard in my life. Like young people who are otherwise at low risk, who will strap a mask to their face outdoors in a very low risk environment, which is the Bay Area, highly vaccinated population, but they won't wear a helmet on their bike and they think they're, quote, following the science. STFU, man. So we can stop that. We can just move on from this pandemic if we have that effective therapeutic and vaccines, because everyone can just STFU about it and we can go back to living our lives. I go back to not being known by any of you muggles, non-medical people, and just go back to bitching and moaning about the healthcare system and how much it sucks to other healthcare professionals, and then talking about meditation, spiritual awakening, and the things that I care about. I actually don't care about this other stuff at all. I really don't. I do it because I feel a weight of responsibility to talk about this stuff because the other people talking about it are idiots. I'm an idiot too, but I'm less of an idiot than they are. All right. Sorry, I'm losing my mind. I'm so tired of COVID, people. All right. So an ideal therapeutic would have those four characteristics. So what's Molnupiravir? Here's the history of this drug. Molnupiravir was developed originally at Emory by one of their nonprofit companies they set up for drug discovery. So this is an academic thing. And they were looking for antivirals to fight things like influenza. And one of the compounds that they looked at was this drug that had this code name that I forget. It's like EID 97612.6, right? But this compound actually had antiviral activity, and here's how it worked. It's eventually been called Molnupiravir, so we'll call it that. So we'll just call it M. Because, like when the kids name the street drugs, it's no longer MDMA, like methyl dioxyallo, blah, 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 whatever. It's Molly. In my day, it was called ecstasy, or X for short, because X gonna give it to you. So let's just call this M for now. And let's hope that doesn't stick, because that's a stupid name. So this compound M acted as what they call a ribonucleoside analog. So it's a prodrug, which means it's metabolized in the body to form the active component. And I don't know if it was how it's metabolized exactly. And what ends up happening is it becomes an analog of a ribonucleoside. Well, what's a ribonucleoside? It's a compound that the virus's genome, its genetic code is ribonucleic acid, RNA. So a ribonucleoside is one of the building blocks of ribonucleic acid, like cytidine, I think that's the exact one, in fact, that this is an analog of. So this is how the drug purportedly works. The coronavirus or influenza or whatever virus they were originally testing it against uses an enzyme called RNA polymerase to generate its RNA code. RNA polymerase works on these ribonucleosides. When you throw a ringer in there, a little faker in the form of this drug, it pretends it's cytidine or whatever, and the virus then inserts it into its genetic code. Well, it turns out that creates a butt ton, that's a scientific term, a metric butt ton of mutations in the virus. In fact, I think the term is, there's an actual scientific term for this. It's like viral catastrophe or something pretty apocalyptic, because it basically causes the virus to have so many mutations that it's lethal for the virus. It can't reassemble, it can't replicate, it can't do what it does. And that's the end of that. That's just lights out for the virus, right? If the lights were ever on in an kind of inanimate thing like that that doesn't have a brain that we know of. So this drug really throws a wrench in viral RNA replication in a catastrophic way, which reduces viral replication because now the virus isn't viable anymore. And that's proposedly how it works. Is proposedly a word? I don't know. I'm not a linguician. I'm a cunning linguist, as Weird Al says once in his song Word Crimes. All right, back to this. This is what happens when I go live on a Sunday with a suit, without a tie. I don't own a tie anymore, I don't think. All right, where were we? Yes. So by throwing a ratchet in viral replication, that's that. So it seems to work. Now, you got to watch out because you don't want to affect human cell replication or any of that issues. You don't want to cause birth defects. You don't want to cause ancillary damage from that. So that's things you'd have to look out for when you're developing a drug like this. So initially it showed activity against influenza, Ebola, chikungunya, which is my favorite virus name. Yo, why aren't you coming into work? I got chikungunya, dog. Why aren't you coming into work? You know? So sometimes I surprise myself at how idiotic I am. Back to the lecture at hand. So it showed all this antiviral activity. So they were developing it as an influenza drug. In 2019, I think there was approval of human phase 1 trials to look at it for influenza. Then a little something called the COVID apocalypse happened. And, oh, thanks for the stars, Heather. For the COVID apocalypse, they said, hey, in animal studies, this thing seems to have activity against SARS-CoV-2. Let's repurpose this and start a trial proceedings to look at whether it works for SARS-CoV-2. The rights for this thing or whatever were purchased by Ridgeback Pharmaceuticals, which is a great name, out of Florida, which is a terrible place for anything scientific. I'm kidding. Florida is where you go when you owe alimony and want to disappear. It's also a wonderful state with many of my fans are in Florida. And I would move there if I could, but I can't. I got to stay here because the wife has a job at Stanford. All that said, Ridgeback Pharmaceuticals picks it up. They start to develop it. Merck, they partner with Merck because you need a big pharma partner in order to get these things going because of the resources and other vagaries, which I won't bother you with. If you're disgusted by big pharma, you should be. But this is how the science works. And when I get to the punchline of this, you'll see, hey, sometimes big pharma is good for some things. Vaccines, ish like this. So they start doing a trial. They start enrolling and now remember, this is the long-winded version of what I'm going to put out on YouTube. So if you're already bored, just tune out. But that'll be a little 12-minute video there that's going up where I actually kept my ish together. This is right after I recorded that, so I no longer give a fudge. And I'm keeping the language clean. You know why? Sunday. Okay, number next, it's the Lord's Day. Number third, I'm wearing a suit. And number fourth, I want you to share this. All right. They start enrolling. Goal of maybe 1,500, 1,800 people. Multinational trial to look at whether Molnupiravir actually works in humans. And the government said, hey, look, we'll purchase a bunch of doses of this, whether it works or not. So we'll take some of this risk away and the cost of the trial and so on. So pharma said, okay, sounds good, boss. Let's do the trial. Double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized, multi-country trial. Unlike most of the ivermectin data, which is garbage data, this is actually a well-designed trial. Now you could say, well, but doesn't Merck also make ivermectin? Yes, they do. So is Merck just ignoring ivermectin because they're making this other drug that'll make them more money? Well, you're right to ask those questions, but no, probably not. Because if they could figure out if ivermectin actually worked and Merck also made ivermectin, which they do, they would figure out a way to make money on it. What they would do is they would bind it with some other drug and sell it as a combo pill and make a ton of money. Believe me, they know how to make money, guys. All right, they don't need global conspiracies to like devalue ivermectin, which doesn't work probably, to make money. They can make money from anything. All right, back to Molnupiravir. So this big trial design, multi-site, and they said, here are the criteria to be in the trial. You got to have COVID, PCR confirmed, within 5 days of being enrolled in the trial. So you can't be having COVID for a month, all right? You have to have at least one risk factor for severe disease. Otherwise, we're probably wasting our time because, hey, newsflash, guys, COVID is generally low risk if you're low risk. If you don't have obesity, elderly age, diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, those kind of things, you're probably going to do fine, which means if we enroll you in the trial, we're wasting our time because ain't nobody going to get sick no matter what, whether you get drug or placebo, right? Usually. So that being said, that out of the way, they enroll the people in the trial. Now, the other inclusion criteria are you can't be too sick. So it's mild to moderate disease and you can't already be hospitalized. Because the idea is give the pill to keep you from being hospitalized. All right? Can't be pregnant. So guess what? They didn't study pregnant people. That's a big deal because there are a lot of pregnant people in the world, but they didn't study it. And that makes sense because we don't know the deal with pregnancy in this drug. You don't want to end up causing birth defects in the trial and so on. There's other ways to look at this and so on. So there you have that. There were some other minor criteria that they said, okay, if you have this, you can't be in it and so on and so forth. But generally that was the group they were looking at. And it turns out they were all unvaccinated. So this is an unvaccinated population. Interesting, right? So they're at risk for disease. They have a risk factor and so on. Okay. They start doing the trial. They move forward. About 775 odd people in the trial at the time that they're looking at the data. They do a data check. Turns out, here's what they find. In the group that got the drug, 7% got hospitalized with severe disease, or with worsening disease, got hospitalized, right? We don't know how severe disease was. We haven't seen. We're going by the press release of top-line data from Merck. We haven't seen the primary data. No one has, maybe outside of FDA. So we're going with what Merck's telling us. All right, because otherwise we know more about it. 7% got hospitalized. In the group that got the sugar pill, otherwise identical group, we think, I haven't looked at the data, but that's what randomized, double-blinded generally produces. Unlike most of the ivermectin data. All right, sorry, I'll stop taking a crap on ivermectin. I'm just so tired of hearing about it from idiots. All right. Hey, look, when I do it live, I'm going to tell you what I actually think. All right. I'll always tell you the truth, but I'm going to tell you the full ZDogg MD unfiltered truth on live. All right. So in the placebo group, 14%, double, got hospitalized. So 50% reduction in hospitalization. Guess how many died? 8. So 8 people died in the placebo group. None died in the treatment group. That's a 100% reduction in death. Small numbers, but that's real. In the entire history of antivirals, I don't think there's ever been an antiviral against a respiratory pathogen that's had this magnitude of effect. That's a strong effect in a randomized, double-blinded, multi-center global trial with good inclusion criteria. I'd love to see the primary data, though, because it hasn't been peer-reviewed, hadn't been released, so this is Merck, all right? With Ridgeback Pharmaceuticals out of Pensacola. I don't know where they're out of. But that'd be kind of cool, wouldn't it? Pensacola sounds like a cool place to be out of if you're doing science. Also a good place to hide if you owe alimony and want to make yourself disappear and start a new life. All right. Kim Bronson says, hey, Z, tell us what you think about ivermectin. I can't shut up. You know that. I'm a bad person. All right, back to this. Side effects. Well, according to Merck versus placebo, adverse events were the same. In fact, maybe even a little higher in placebo for random stuff and roughly balanced for drug-related adverse events. And in fact, more people in the placebo group discontinued the drug thinking they were side effects than in the actual treatment group. That's encouraging. So let's see what that shows when we see the final data. So far it looked reasonably safe, but again, not a huge numbers, and we haven't seen the primary data, and pretty effective. So what does this tell us? This so far, sorry, most important part. How could I forget? They stopped the trial early because an independent review board looked at the data and said, hey, this is such a compelling signal for efficacy and safety that if you continue to give these people placebo, this is an ethics violation. You have to stop the trial and give the people who got placebo, well, now it's too late because they've already gotten COVID, but you can't continue to give placebo because the effect is so strong. So you want those kind of boards to say that because otherwise you're putting people's lives at risk that didn't need to be at risk. But that just tells you how strong the treatment effect was, that they stopped the trial early. Now that means they were supposed to enroll up to 1,800 or something. And they did enroll a few more, but that stopped the trial. Okay, so you can kind of read into that, man, that's pretty effective, but also, man, I wish we had a little more data, you know, but maybe we didn't need it because treatment effect was so strong. Okay, so here we go. Hey, Janine, don't leave to watch some game, the Jays game. I don't even know what the Jays are. Are they basketball, baseball, football, soccer, Quidditch? I don't know. I don't do sports. I wear suits on Sunday. I come to the church of the internet. And I worship science at the altar of mindfulness. I don't know what any of that just meant, but I stand by it. I stand adjacent to it. I'm mindfulness adjacent. Okay, back to this. Janine giving me the kissy face emoji. It's baseball. All right, Kimberly, thank you for that. I like base in my ball. Back to this. What does it mean? It means that for people who are in this trial, for people who are unvaccinated, mild to moderate disease with a risk factor, this thing is a game changer. Keep you out of the hospital, keep you from dying, 50% more likely to keep you out of the hospital. I mean, cut your risk in half of going to the hospital. And mortality effect may be even more profound. Wow, that's a big deal. What does it say about vaccinated people? Nothing. So it could be that vaccinated people who break through and go to the hospital might get benefit from this, but we haven't studied them, so we don't know. Here's another piece. Guess what? The variants were in the trial. 80% of them were Delta, Gamma, and Mu. The worst of the worst, like the crew of doom of variants. And it was still this effective. So it works against the variants. Oh, hell yeah. That's great. So we don't know about vaccinated people, but my suspicion, we'd have to see. My suspicion is, hey, if you break through the vax and you get this drug, hell yeah, you're probably going to be even better than okay because your risk of severe disease is already quite low if you have been vaccinated. What about combining it with monoclonals? No reason you shouldn't be able to. Different mechanisms of action operate at different levels of this disease pathway. So a very high-risk person could get monoclonals, Molnupiravir, hopefully has been vaccinated, and their risk of dying is much, much, much less. Got to look at what's going to happen because Merck is actually requesting an emergency use authorization for this drug. What do we know about kids? Not a crap because these are adults that were studied in the trial. So it still doesn't help us to understand about kids. So there's that. So what does all this mean? If this data pans out, if emergency youth, I'm having a stroke. It's because of my mRNA vaccines. By the way, can we stop for a second? mRNA vaccines do not cause blood clotting at a rate higher than the background expected in the population. Stop talking about that. It doesn't happen that in any of our surveillance, we just don't see a signal for blood clotting in mRNA vaccines. But I had a friend who took the vaccine and then they had a stroke. Listen to yourself. Just listen to yourself. Correlation does not equal causation. Johnson & Johnson, yes. Rare blood clotting syndrome, the vaccine-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenia, yes. mRNA vaccines, no. So many emails to me, but I'm worried about clot risk. I can't tell you how many people have emailed me. I have factor V Leiden. I'm at risk for clots. I don't want to get the vaccine. And I'm sitting here going, you want to get COVID? So you want to get COVID instead. Because COVID increases your blood clot risk exponentially. And then I tell them another thing. I have factor V Leiden. I got Moderna ×2. No clots. Oh, guess what? I also have prothrombin 20210A. The combination of those two mutations that I have, because I'm inbred AF apparently, like Uncle Dad inbred. I'm just being real with you. I'm a Zoroastrian. There's 100,000 of us left in the world. We didn't outbreed until only recently. So we're like Ashkenazi Jews. Like we have some weird-ish. So I have both these. According to 23andMe, which is the authority on all things, I have a 75% lifetime risk based on 2 studies of having a blood clot. And I got Moderna with eyes wide open knowing this because I looked at the data. And I ain't dead yet. I think this is wood. All right. So if this gets emergency use authorization, right? And it's looked at, we now have a therapeutic, cuts risk of hospitalization and death. We have vaccines, which are phenomenal, phenomenal. Even in the face of variants so far. We have recovered COVID patients who've generated immunity, which is pretty good, right? I'd love them to get vaccinated as well with at least 1 dose of mRNA because it's better when you do that. But, you know, your risk may vary. Your risk tolerance may vary. That's okay. That's why I hate mandates. All right, back to this. We have that. You have kids who are generally low risk, but can also be vaccinated up to a certain age, and that may extend that age. By the way, Governor Newsom mandating vaccines for kids. Come on. Come on. That's going to be a new rant another day in California. Sometimes I'm ready to move to Florida, guys. Florida. Should have got them apple bottom scrubs, Crocs with the fur, the whole day billing Medicare. That just happened. You now have all this. Pandemic's over. Let me repeat that. If that happens, pandemic's over. And to this extent, stop talking about it. Stop writing about it. Stop worrying about it. Take your mask off. Get vaccinated. If you get sick, get this drug. If you're really high risk, get this drug plus monoclonals. If you get hospitalized, get this drug plus monoclonals, plus dexamethasone, plus remdesivir, plus, try to avoid a ventilator if you can. But if you have to be ventilated, you have to be ventilated, and do all the things we've learned in the ICU. And this becomes an endemic, treatable disease. And we can STF you about this garbage. I can get back to talking to medical people about how burned out we are, how morally injured we are, and how tired of you we are, my dear Muggle friends. Saying the same things over and over and over again, and still nobody listening to us because you know what? We don't have the time to develop the proper relationship with you, to actually be with you when you're at your most vulnerable, when you're feeling the worst you've ever felt in your life. Instead of us looking at a computer trying to chart so we can get paid because we're serving multiple masters and we're injured because of it morally, psychically, emotionally, spiritually, we can get back to looking you in the eye, holding your hand, and being there with you to make an interpretive decision together, knowing your hopes, dreams, fears, knowing your kids' names, knowing your pets' names, and then telling you, hey, if you were my sister, brother, lover, mother, whatever, mother lover, very funny Justin Timberlake and Andy Samberg piece. If you were that, this is what I would recommend, but it's your choice. Wouldn't that be nice? We can get back to that instead of this COVID BS that's put families against families, like family members against each other. This is nuts. Dude, life is so short. There are fates worse than death. Why are we arguing over stupid crap and not loving each other? Huh? Really? It's worth that? Like what your politics are is worth like wrecking the only close relationships you have? And does it really? I mean, really? How many emails I get? You know, this thing's wrecking my marriage. My wife's an anti-vaxxer. I'm a pro-vaxxer. This, that, the other thing. My husband likes QAnon. I like, Bernie. Like, we can't get along. It's like, these are all stories we tell ourselves. None of it's real, guys. What's real is this. Love. Love is real. Did Lenin say that? I don't care who said that. As long as it wasn't Vladimir Ilyinich Ulyanov Lenin. Okay, that guy was an a-hole. Let's look at some comments now. A lot of talk about us down under Australia, 80% vaccination by November. Hey, you guys do that? You get 80%? You're going to do okay. You have no real pre-existing immunity. That's the thing. So it gets a little tricky. Let me scroll on. Dude, where the hell? Where'd all my comments go, people? Hit me with the comments now, son. My parents almost died from COVID last year. Now there's too many comments. Okay, they're on ivermectin prophylactically. Don't do that, Teresa. Don't do that. I mean, they can do whatever they want, but that just is not indicated. How about they get vaccinated, even if they've had COVID, if they're worried about a reinfection? And again, I'm saying this out of love. I want them to be okay. If they were my loved ones, I would be like, here's the ivermectin bottle that they're, slap it out of their hand. Have you been vaccinated yet? No? All right. I know you have recovered and you have some immunity, but you're high risk. You were very sick the first time. Reinfections happen both for vaccinated and naturally infected people. At least get 1 dose of an mRNA vaccine. I'd love it even if you got 2, because then you're going to be a super freaking star. These vaccines are extremely low risk. I don't want to see you sick. Let's do this. That's what I would say. But what do I know? I'm just a UCSF Stanford trained doctor and pharma shill. Don't take money from pharma. Don't care what happens to Merck. Don't care what happens to Pfizer. Care what happens to you and me and us. Want the right thing to happen. Tina, should someone who's had 2 Pfizer and then had a mild case of COVID, high risk, get a booster? Probably not. Seems crazy. Your natural infection was like a booster. Boosters are one of the things that's such a gray area. We just don't have great data on preventing severe disease in average people. That's why I was real like, the FDA said, don't give it to the average Joe. And then they kind of said, unless you work in a high risk profession, which means any average Joe could get it. Well, I work as a, pickle farmer in Fresno. I don't think they grow pickles in Fresno, but I'm high risk. It's like, I don't know. Anyone who wants a booster, go ahead, get a booster. It's not like there's a huge downside to it, except for the discomfort of symptoms or whatever, sore arm, whatever that. But if it's not going to help you prevent severe disease, why waste your time? Let other people have the doses, even though we're drowning in the doses here in the U.S. and the rest of the world is starving for them. It's crazy. Equity has never been a part of this conversation. It's never been a part of COVID from the beginning. It's like rich people, like members of the Zoomocracy who can make a living doing this bullshit. We're safe. Like we're safe from COVID. We don't have to even get COVID. And if we do, we have gym memberships, personal trainers. We have a diet that's better. We don't eat fast food because we're rich enough to buy decent food. And we have tons of money. We're just showering in money during COVID because we can work from home. We didn't lose our job. We're fine, but we're perfectly fine yelling at people to stay at home and wear their masks so that we're safe while we're ordering up our Instacart so that the delivery guy can put himself at risk, so that the line cook, who, by the way, is at higher risk than a healthcare professional for getting COVID, can put themselves at risk for our bean burrito. Right? Equity has never been the focus of this pandemic. Poor people in the developing world, they can, India, basically 10x the mortality they reported. unvaccinated population. Delta rips through, and now everyone's like, look, ivermectin saved India. Don't be an idiot. Delta did what it does. It rips through the vulnerable population, killed a ton of people. And then they're like, but look at Uttar Pradesh. Don't be an idiot. All right? Seriously. Now I'm just getting emotional about this because you're just behaving irrationally. You're ideologically motivated. We all are, right? But the point is, poor people always get the shaft. And during this pandemic, it's no exception, right? Who's unvaccinated? A lot of them are poor people, rural folks. They tend to skew a little more conservative in some areas. They tend to be more rural. But who's getting screwed? The people at higher risk. Because those populations are more obese. They have higher risk factors. I don't know, man. It's upsetting because the intelligentsia can sit at home, on Twitter. Peter Hotez said this, and Fauci said this, and Eric Topol said this, and Bobby McFerrin said this. Remember Bobby McFerrin? Don't worry. Be happy. Don't worry, be happy. If you have essential work, then some rich guy's going to be a jerk and tell you stay home, except to deliver my burrito. That just happened, and that was terrible. You're welcome. We don't even need to wear masks as it's not mandatory anymore. Susan McDonald. I don't know why we're still wearing masks if we're vaccinated. Oh, but you can still transmit. Yeah. I can still get hit by an asteroid too. I can still get punched by a clown. But I don't wear anti-clown armor all day. People are going to hate me. What about long haulers? Will the shot make their symptoms worse? No. In fact, there's lots of anecdotal data, for whatever that's worth, that getting vaccinated seems to improve long haul symptoms. We don't know why. There's some speculation, but we don't know why. Can organ transplant folks take this treatment? Vaccines aren't working. So organ transplant folks are at higher risk because they're immunocompromised. That's why we do recommend boosters for them. And Molnupiravir, I don't know if organ transplant was an exclusion criteria. I don't think it was, but I don't know that they had a big population of organ transplant people in the trial. So we'll have to see. But the hope is they can take it, right? Because a lot of antivirals can be used in transplant people. Shouldn't be a problem. So that shouldn't be a problem. Hey, don't make fun of Bobby McFerrin. He's a genius, says Lee Coogan. Did you ever see the Key and Peele episode where it was Bobby McFerrin and the guy from the Police Academy series who does all the sound effects? And they were like rivals, and they were backstage after a gig, and they were having like a sound off. McFerrin is pretty awesome. I like his dreadlocks too. Should people over 65 get the booster, says Gloria? Yeah, probably. Because they have something called immune aging, which means the antibodies and their T-cell response and everything just wanes because older people their immune system is older. It doesn't do the same stuff. Vaccination helped my 16-year-old son's long-haul symptoms, says supporter Lynn Burbank. That's a good anecdotal piece of data there. It'd be interesting. We really ought to study it. Let's see what else. If you're vaccinated and can get a breakthrough case, do you... these things scroll so fast and now it's gone. Do you have the same super antibodies as someone who has had COVID and still gets the vaccine? Nobody knows I don't think we know the answer to this, but theoretically, you ought to have pretty good immunity. You've got vaccine immunity, then you get the booster in the form of natural infection breakthrough. So you ought to have really robust T-cell and B-cell memory cells, assuming you have a normal immune system. That's the best we can speculate, I think, because it has not been studied that I know of. Thank you, Holly. That's kind of you. Thanks for your common sense approach. I listen to you because you're a doctor and get how screwed up Big Pharma is. So, look, I don't hate anybody in, the pharma and these big industry things. This is the system. So a system that's evolved on money and in financial incentives and all of this without and where the regulators themselves are from industry a lot of the time, so there's regulatory capture, you should be very suspicious of whether there's bias. It doesn't mean intentional bias, but there's bias, And there's the bias of when you're a hammer, the world looks like a nail. So when you work in pharma, or if you're conditioned as a doctor to think drugs cure everything, then you're going to have that bias and you're going to be acting out of what you think is good, but it may not be objectively correct. That's why we always have to examine our biases, why we always have to question our beliefs. Every single belief we have to question. Even our most fundamental beliefs like, I am this body separate from you and the universe. Question that belief and see what happens. And keep questioning and keep inquiring and keep going deeper and see what happens. Anyways, that's another subject. You people must think I'm crazy. Now you're thinking, what do you mean, you people? Brian says, I think California craziness has rubbed off on you, and that's why you're so pro-vax. I go for traditional, where is it? Traditional something. It's gone. These comments scroll way too fast. Let me see if I can pop this out. Hold on. By the way, that's good that you're questioning my bias based on where I live. I live in the Bay Area, which has the lowest coronavirus transmission rates in the country right now. We're highly vaccinated. There are multiple universities. It's a very educated population, and higher degrees of education are correlated with higher degrees of vaccination. So yeah, there's definite bias there. It's good to question it. I will say this though, I will question your bias towards whatever the last part of your statement was, which is traditional medicine. I can't find your comment anymore, or whatever. So why would that be better than a vaccination? Question your belief on that. What's your bias? And inquire into it. And then try to find data and try to challenge your bias. And then see what you come up with. Maybe your bias was correct, or maybe you're as biased as I am. The thing is, I try to question my biases so I can say this, looking in the entire history of human medicine, the only real medications that really do a whole hell of a lot are antibiotics, which have their own problems because they create resistant organisms, right? Certain cancer drugs like Gleevec for very specific cancers, certain hormone replacement type things like thyroid replacement hormone for people with deficiencies, vitamins for people with deficiencies, and vaccines. And maybe another couple things here and there, but that's it. So I don't know if I'm putting statistical weight on the probability of something working. It's much more likely that vaccines are going to work than therapeutics in general. And Vinay Prasad and I have spoken about this on the show. By the way, and I'm going to say this. This is important. I've had a lot of people message me and say, hey, I was going to get the vaccine, then the mandates happened, and I just hate the fact that they're forcing me to do this. I feel like this is a slippery slope to oppression. I don't understand what they're thinking. They don't understand people at all. They don't understand people like me, and I just won't be a part of this, so I'm not getting vaccinated. All right, I get it. That's a belief-based moral stance you're taking, right? We do that. We're humans. We're moral creatures. We're primarily moral and secondarily logical. So what I tell people is, okay, that's cool, but you're going to sacrifice your own health and well-being because that's what you're doing, right? On a risk spectrum, you're more likely to do that than you are to piss off Biden by not getting vaccinated, to just spite these people. So if you end up getting sick or infecting a loved one who will get sick because you took the stand, they've won in a literal sense if they're the enemy to you, which they shouldn't be. So that's a way to think about it. And then when I talk to people who are super pro-vax, I'm just like, dude, shut up. Like, you're such an ardent militant about this that you can't even see your own bias here. Like, you want to vaccinate a 5-year-old under mandate? Based on what data? What effing world are you in? That you think, oh, a little vaccine good, a lot better for everyone. Like, use your brain, dude. You're always talking about following the science. Shut up about the science. That's the dogma. Follow science. If you follow science, you'd realize, hey, give parents a choice with young kids. they're not all at the same risk. And we don't even know what the myocarditis rate in a 5-year-old is at the dose they're proposing, which is, a lower dose. So you see, every side has to question its idiocy. Are we really being rational, compassionate actors here, right? So it's good if you see a bias in me, call it out by all means. And it could be absolutely true. I know I have biases. I often call them out myself on the show, right? I definitely have a science bias.